When you look at a giraffe, an obvious question comes to mind. How did its neck get so long? Did individual giraffes stretch their necks, reaching for high leaves over their lifetimes? Or did the short-necked ones simply die out, leaving only the long-necked variations behind? In 1809, the French biologist Jean-Baptiste Lamarck proposed the first cohesive theory of evolution. He argued for the stretching side of the debate. Lamarck laid out 4 key postulates. First, he claimed organisms possess an internal vital force that drives them to increase in size. Second, he argued that a changing environment creates new needs, forcing the organism to change its daily habits to survive. This leads directly to his third postulate, the use and disuse of organs. Lamarck proposed that continuous use strengthens and enlarges an organ, just like giraffes stretching their necks to reach higher branches. Conversely, disuse causes an organ to degenerate. He pointed to snakes, strongly suggesting their ancestral lizards adopted a burrowing habit, stopped using their legs, and eventually lost them entirely. The final step in his theory is postulate 4, the inheritance of acquired characters. Lamarck concluded that any physical modification an organism acquires during its lifetime, through use or disuse, is directly passed down to its offspring. Lamarck's theory feels highly intuitive because we see physical effort changing bodies every day. A weightlifter builds muscle through effort. But do not confuse physical effort with heritability. This is a classic trap in biology exams. The muscle built by the weightlifter is never inherited by their newborn child. To test Lamarck's logic, we turn to the German biologist August Weismann. In 1892, Weismann conducted a definitive experiment. He took laboratory mice and cut off their tails. He then bred them. He repeated this exact amputation for 22 consecutive generations. If Lamarck was right, the disuse and physical loss of the tail would be inherited. Instead, every single mouse in the 23rd generation was born with a perfectly normal, full-length tail. Weismann proved a concept you must memorize: the strict division between somatoplasm and germplasm. Somatic cells are your general body cells. Germ cells are your reproductive cells. Weismann established that variations acquired in the somatic cells, like a cut tail or a stretched neck, cannot be inherited. Only variations occurring in the reproductive germplasm are passed to the next generation. By 1859, Charles Darwin had already published a completely different mechanism for evolution. He called it natural selection. Darwin realized that evolution is not driven by an individual organism's lifelong struggle to change its own body. Instead, it is driven by nature filtering out the individuals that are unfit to survive in a shifting environment. We can map Darwin's theory using a specific flowchart, often required in the WBCHSE exam. It begins with a mathematical clash. Organisms have an immense fertility rate, leading to the overproduction of offspring. A single codfish lays about 4 million eggs. However, environmental space and food supply remain strictly limited. Millions of offspring competing for constant resources forces a struggle for existence.
This struggle happens on 3 fronts: intraspecific, competing against your own species; interspecific, competing against other species; and environmental, battling the climate and disease. Because no 2 individuals are perfectly identical, this struggle acts as a filter. Organisms with useful variations gain a survival advantage. Nature selects these fittest individuals to survive and reproduce. Over many generations, these favorable variations accumulate, resulting in the origin of a new species. We can observe natural selection directly in the case of the peppered moth in England. Before the 1850s, light-colored moths easily hid from birds against lichen-covered trees. But as the Industrial Revolution advanced, soot coated the tree trunks and killed the lichen. This population graph shows the frequency of moth colors before and after industrialization. Notice that the dark moth variation already existed in the population before the pollution arrived. The dark moths didn't change their own color out of need. The environment changed, suddenly giving the pre-existing dark moths a massive camouflage advantage. The soot shifted the population frequencies entirely. Nature does not generate advantageous traits upon request. It only selects from the random variations that are already sitting in the genetic pool. If nature only preserves useful variations, how do vestigial organs like the human appendix stay in the population for millions of years? Darwin struggled to answer this because he viewed evolution through the lens of gross physical utility. He didn't realize that a neutral trait, one that isn't helping but also isn't killing the organism, will hitchhike through generations indefinitely. Without understanding the molecular mechanism of heredity, he couldn't see that traits don't just evaporate because they are useless. They must be actively selected against to disappear. This was Darwin's greatest limitation. While he correctly documented the arrival of the fittest, he lacked the Mendelian genetics needed to explain how variations originate or why neutral traits persist in the genetic code. In the 20th century, scientists merged Darwinian natural selection with Mendel's laws of genetics to form Neo-Darwinism, also known as the modern synthetic theory. Neo-Darwinism relies on 5 core principles. It establishes that the true sources of Darwin's variations are structural changes in DNA, specifically gene mutations and chromosomal aberrations, mixed through genetic recombination. It also redefines natural selection. Rather than just survival of the fittest, Neo-Darwinism defines selection precisely as the differential reproduction of gene complexes that offer superior fitness in a given environment. Finally, reproductive isolation locks these genetic differences in, completing the process of speciation. This chart maps out the progression of evolutionary thought for your final board revision. Lamarck focused on physical effort. Darwin identified the environmental filter. Neo-Darwinism provides the molecular mechanism that ties the entire process to genetic science. Evolutionary theory itself evolved, from a flawed guess about physical effort to a grand observation of survival, and finally into the precise genetic framework we use today.